So we're here today to talk through rolling out sales compensation plans. So the do's and the don'ts. We're going to hear some best practices about how to do it right. We might share some emotional scars on when it went wrong, and then hopefully have some fun along the way. But first, let's just do some intros. So I'll start with myself. So I'm an associate director at the Boston Consulting Group. I'm one of our leaders in the sales compensation practice and a core member of our go-to-market and sales effectiveness topic. I also lead up our comp administration practice, partnering with leading and innovative ICM, SPM players like Forma in the space, so that we can offer end-to-end design services from strategy design all the way to implementation of the compensation plan. I spent over a decade in the space with experience kind of all sorts of industries, tech, software, ag, furniture, pharmaceuticals, automotive, financial services, quite a few others as well. And just in general, on the sales compensation nut. I love the topic, and I'm excited to be a part of this session where I can talk with three other nuts on the line. So, with that in mind, why don't I introduce our panelists? So, I'm joined by Becky Gimignani from LabCorp, Christopher Goff from Yext, and Kyle Peterson from Rippling. So Becky, why don't you kick us off with an intro? Tell us a bit about yourself, your role, any background role, any roles prior to your current one that are in the sales comp space, and a bit about LabCorp.
Sure. So again, Becky Gimignani. I'm actually with Yext, and so
sorry.
No worries. Okay. Also a high tech company. I've been in sales comp for 20 years, and right now at Yext, I'm the senior director of sales commissions. I'm on the finance side, and I partner with sales ops very closely, and the two of us manage the whole process. I started in sales comp at something called Siebel Systems, and there goes my phone in the background. Sorry about that. Anyway, and then I went from there to got bought by Oracle, was there for a bit, and then was at Apple prior to joining Yext. And I've been here for about 4 years. So again, about 20 years in the space, mostly on the finance side. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Chris, why don't we have you go next?
Yeah. So I'm currently senior director at sales compensation at LabCorp. And so I've been in sales comp in some form or fashion for about 17 years. I grew up in sales operations. It was very much a couple months in, figure it out in terms of sales incentive learning, and kind of since then I've been in and around the world of sales compensation, having lived in sales ops, finance, and HR, and much of my focus has been predominantly from the HR and sales ops side.
Thanks. Kyle?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Kyle Peterson. I am VP of Sales for PEO Insurance and Talent Products at Rippling. If you haven't heard of Rippling, we are basically allowing you to easily manage your employees' payroll, HR, benefits, expenses, devices, globally and all in one place. So I am excited to be here at Rippling. I've been here for about 8 months now. And prior to this, I have over a decade of experience growing and leading sales teams. So excited to share some of the lessons I've learned of what works and doesn't work while changing and rolling out comp plans.
Thanks, Kyle. And I love that we have not only sales compensation directors, but also sales, right? Very different roles in terms of the when you think about how it comes to designing the compensation plan. So wherever you can, of course, please contrast. But obviously, you're a big stakeholder in the design as well. So very interested in hearing that as we get through the discussion. And so why don't we get into it? So we're going to facilitate this discussion kind of into 3 chunks. So there's the rollout of the compensation plan, but a big part of the rollout is the prep work, right? The actual design itself, and all of the setting of the table, things that you can do to make sure it's a success. Then there's the actual rollout, and then finally there's post rollout, what went well, what didn't, how do we know it actually works. So I want to start with kind of just the prep phase, the design phase, and then we'll go from there. And when I think about that setting of the table comment I made earlier, I'm thinking like credibility building. What feedback do we need to collect? How are we going to plan for the change management? Of course, you have to design a good compensation plan, and we've had a lot of sessions before this where people have talked about that. I don't think we need to get into metrics today, as much as I would love to. But I want to talk a bit more about the credibility part. Like, how do you make sure that you've done all the steps that need to be taken so that once you actually launch the plan, you've gotten the feedback you needed, the credibility is there. You're not kind of 10 steps behind before you need to be. So maybe we start with kind of just an overarching question. Becky, I might start with you on this one. Using that credibility comment, what steps do you take during the design phase to ensure it's credible and will work in the real world? Like thinking about feedback you need to collect, the experts you might need to consult with, all the different stakeholders you need to assemble. Would love to just kind of hear your overarching story on how you make that happen.
Sure. So I think so. Before I do much of that, the first thing we do is lay out everything that needs to happen, because if you've been in sales comp for any amount of time, you know that there is so much that happens with planning a rollover. There is so many business partners, there's IT, there's legal, there's the timeline, there's systems, there's, besides even talking to your revenue leaders and all of that. So the first thing I do is map out what the timeline looks like and what steps we're going to take. Then another thing that we often do is a survey. So we survey our sales constituency and find out what has worked, what hasn't, what they like, what they don't like. At other companies, I've also done like kind of one-on-ones or table talks with some salespeople. We know, if you've been in sales comp a while, there are some people who are more verbose than others. And you know what? Use those people. They like to tell you what's going on. So I usually try to have a conversation with them. One of the people that worked for me years ago used to laugh because they said that if anyone ever complained to me, I would be like their new best friend. Really? Okay, why? Tell me all about that. What can we do better? What are you thinking? So definitely leverage the relationships and the communication to talk about what's happening. The other thing is, before we do anything, and this, is getting the strategy. What are we as a company going to be working on? What do we want to focus on this year, et cetera? Because that hopefully drives your comp plan setup. So those are kind of all the steps that we do, just very high level, to talk through what we're doing to prep before we even get into the design phase. Yeah, I think that's a good.
It's a great. No, it's a great one. I mean, you mentioned the complaining point. I love that, right? I think actually in some of other sessions, Nabil, CEO Forum, I've heard him mention this noise concept, right? And I think the goal is to minimize noise, minimize the complaints. Completely agree. And still, though, if there's noise, you gotta capture it. And the complainers, and I say that with love, right? Have a lot of good feedback that you can capture. So I think that's a really good trait, right? Go into the noise and figure out how you can lower the volume. Chris, why don't we? I want to get your take on that.
Well, first, I like the phrase that "go into the noise." It's kind of embrace it. I like that. The perspective I have probably comes from a little bit of the "when it went wrong" sort of sentiment. One of the things that I feel like is a bit of a takeaway is more related to kind of like assess the room or figure out the power and the politics that may have evolved since last year, or whatever your fiscal cycle is of the review. I remember a particular time a number of years ago about a new professional services leader who, and I come from healthcare IT predominantly. I spent much of my years in business before where I am now. And when he sort of jumped in, there was a lot of additional clout that was given to him, and there's a desire, especially with new leadership, to want to make sure they influence as much as possible. Right? They're expected to turn the ship quickly, and with that, there was essentially underlying assumption that we're not changing the things that seem to be working from our vantage point, right? And we didn't read the room fully for the new person who had a particular agenda, wanting to do things a specific way. And so we got very far along to come to a dead halt, right? And that happens to be something that none of us like to experience in the cycle of a project management, as Becky shared. Right, we had all of the things, we knew what we needed to do, we didn't read it well, we missed it, and we had to go back to the drawing board. And because it was a revenue category, it was a start over, right? Because it impacted so many different plans and so many different roles. And so that's a little bit of a don't do this sort of a sentiment.
Yeah, that's one of the wounds I was referring to. So definitely a painful memory. But I'd love to, the concept of like starting over. I always find that tricky in sales comp, right? Because usually we're working with pretty tight deadlines. We have a Jan launch, or if you're on that kind of fiscal year. So how did you handle that? Did you have that issue, or did you have a little more free reign on timeline?
Well, I'll be honest. Most of my cycle of let's say rollouts,
Yeah,
rarely happen exactly as planned. In terms of most of the time, we're waiting on budgets to be resolved before we can roll things out, and this happened to effectively be no different. So what it did is it did impact the timeline of rollout, and the big teams effectively got the attention of the let's fix them first, and the smaller teams, they got less love in the game, and so we held off what we could and rolled out what we could when we could.
Yeah. No, classic prioritization makes a lot of sense. Kyle, why don't we hear from you again on kind of this credibility building, setting the table before we even get it to a rollout. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
So when it comes to sales, there are two truths they will always be truths, like immutable laws, I guess, if you will. One of them is incentives drive behavior. We know that. And the second thing is people, especially if you're in sales, we're going to be skeptical, right? We don't want you touching our money. And anytime you come to us and you are touching our money, we are going to be skeptical. So now you've got these two situations where you've got a skeptical audience who's going to be impacted by this, and incentives drive behavior. And so for me in the design phase, what has to be true is like, what are we ultimately trying to accomplish? What are those behaviors that we are trying to change? And we have to write that down. That is like our North Star, so that inevitably when we are going through the design phase and we're talking about all the different levers in the comp plan and the KPIs, and we start to come to that fork in the road of should we do X or Y, it's, well, which one best aligns with the North Star we set out to actually go after. So for me, if you are starting and you do not yet have that, like you're already kind of setting yourself up to get in a really, really bad situation.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, some of the most painful compensation design meetings I've had is when we're relitigating the strategy in the middle of like a mechanical discussion, right? Because we didn't actually agree on the behaviors and what we wanted to achieve. And so when it comes to crediting, it's like this crediting choice versus this crediting choice is going to drive a very different behavior. And that behavior is aligned to a different strategy. And suddenly you're like, what is happening in this meeting? And we have to go back to the drawing board. And I'm not ashamed to admit, like, they don't always go the way I want them to. And that's a pretty common symptom of that not going well, what you just called out.
And if I might add to that, I think I appreciate, Kyle, you mentioning that as well. It feels like it's a underlying sales compensation philosophy, right? Like, what is it that we want to put money on, right? From a company, organizational, cultural, strategic, because strategy does shift and evolve, right, over time. But presumably, hey, net new business, we pay more for that, right? Existing client sales, we pay less for that proportionally, right? And we call it out and say this is how it should philosophically run as an organization, and we can go and check it, right? So when we're struggling through something, hey, does that align? Yes or no? And it helps us all move forward.
Yep.
Yeah, that's well said. So then maybe thinking a bit more on this topic, the stakeholders that need to be involved. And let's think like, there's the executive stakeholders, then there's the actual working team, and then like that extended team of people. I'd love to hear, maybe Chris, I'll go back to you on this one. Like who's involved in the process when you're designing the plan? Again, think working team, exec team, and like what roles do they play as you kind of evolve to the final point where you're trying to get sign off on the plan?
Having done this a couple of times, I feel like it's almost contingent on who has a little bit more influence, right?
Yeah.
So kind of go back to a little bit of what I said before, or how does this work? I've been in organizations culturally where sales was very, very strong, and others where finance was had a little bit more power at the table, and or ops or what have you, right? And so some people are a little more vocal or more emotional about what it is that should drive this year, and I think the makeup of the teams sort of work that way. But at its core, right? I think we need a couple of primary players, and this is the interesting thing about sales comp is it doesn't all just sit in one place, right? And I think that's the thing about like just the people at this table. We're talking about some folks who have I'm in HR, Becky's in finance, we have sales, right? Just on the table, you have operations, accounting, marketing, and on and on and on. We have lots of teams, and so the makeup of that may a little bit be different as a rule, company to company, right? But you do need to have people that represent the best interests of the aspects of the program, which include like the measures, the strategy, the pay, the administration, and the people, right? And if we can cover those, the makeup of the teams may differ group to group or organization to organization.
Yeah. Becky, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I think it's a great comment to kind of know, like, even at a company, it might be different year to year on who is actually driving what needs to happen that year and org structure changes, et cetera. And the other thing I just thought because I'm on the finance and I'm on the processing side, the thing that I think of most often is there's a lot of great ideas out there, but if you can't technically make it work, so you need to partner really well with your systems folks, because we've had some great ideas, but we can't measure them. And if it ends up being a manual measurement, it's just not incenting, in my opinion, it's not incenting the behavior you want, because if sales reps don't know how they're going to get paid until after the month ends because they can't see it in any tool, it's not as effective. So that's my plug on the processing side, which is make sure that you can measure whatever the great ideas are.
Makes sense. Kyle, anything to add on kind of people involved in the process?
I'm certainly biased here, but I would say sales needs to be heavily involved. And more specifically, I would say, like, sure, maybe we'll probably talk here soon about like a steering committee, right? But like even before that, you need to have someone on your sales leadership team who intimately understands what your sales reps are saying to prospects. So let me give you an example. If one of the things that we agree is our North Star is we are trying to increase adoption, right? The first 30 days is really, really critical. We know there's a lot of correlation between people who get fully ramped up in 30 days and how long they stick around versus those who try it for 2 weeks and leave. So we've identified that as a behavior we need to change. What can't happen is you've got a bunch of executives and people in finance and ops and HR making decisions with zero context on what is actually being said at the moment of sale between the AE and the buyer. And so whether it's going out into the field and like actually listening to the pitch, listening to the commercial negotiations, listening to the concerns of the buyer, someone has to intimately understand that. So you have an informed voice in the room on like, if you change the comp to be X, this will allow me to now go to my team and say, hey, that talk track you keep using of like tries for 30 days, you don't like us, like that has to end. Better's now going to sound like give them a new talk track. So I would just say sales needs to be involved, but it's not just like get someone with the title of sales in the room. It's get someone who understands what's being said at the point of sale in the room.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's so important as well to have sales in the room. Not only just like for the on the ground, like realistic view on things, but also I think as being a champion, right? You can actually have someone on behalf of the compensation committee that is sales that can then help roll it out, right? And so you're the person that probably best knows your sales team was actually on that team that designed the plan, and I think that goes a long way. the one other thing on the team I wanted to highlight is there's the steerco and there's the working team. I find with the working team, one of the where I've seen these design phases go wrong is when you don't have like the tiebreaker, like the executive almost, right? There's the executives on the steerco, but sometimes there's an executive also on the working team, because I mean, as I'm sure everyone here and most people on the phone on the line knows, there's a lot of opinions that come up on compensation, and we're not always going to get full alignment. And at some point, you just need to move on and choose one of two probably pretty good options. If there's that much debate, they're probably both fine. Let's just choose one. Um, or maybe one's not good, but either way, someone needs to choose, right? Having that executive there to help tie break and move us along, again, with kind of that context of there's deadlines is pretty important. So maybe just I'll throw it out to Chris maybe one more time on this one. Like, what do you have that kind of executive on your teams that help move things along, like, or have you had that pain? I'm curious on how that is handled.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
to sort of see,
Yeah.
depending on how far, it's kind of like a phases thing, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a certain practice of the, wrapping up the components piece by piece, and having the right people who can either help you overcome any conflicts that may arise or any questions that may come up. I would say that socialization component with whoever it is that you can have as an executive champion is absolutely an ideal aspect to just, if nothing else, sort of work the rest of the crowd on your behalf, right? Because they have that clout and credibility to help you overcome whatever conflicts that may arise. Even like soon after rollout, right? When criticisms come about what's not working already, and people expecting immediate results and reactions that come from that process. I think that is a really solid best practice to kind of identify some players that can then assist you in that whole process.
Love it. So I'm gonna move us to the second, and I saw some questions in the chat. I think they're more oriented to the second part of this discussion. So we'll get through the discussion and then build on those questions. So now we're in the rollout. We talked a bit about setting the table. Now we have our plan, and it's time to launch the rollout of it. So now you're not going live quite yet on the plan, but hey, we've changed something. What does that communication cascade look like? So I'd love to hear, maybe Becky, your philosophy on just how do you normally communicate the rollout of the plan? Like, who's involved? When does it happen? How much time do you give yourself? When's the first time the rep is even aware, right, that something's happening, to when you actually get the announcement and the one-on-ones, if you even do that?
Well, ideally, we're doing it before the plan year starts, so they know how they're incented when the year starts. But we target RKO when we really go through the details, etc.
And RKO, just for the group.
Oh, sorry, the revenue kickoff.
Yep.
Sorry. Acronyms.
All good. We have a billion. It's all good.
So we target that. We've had conversations at that point with the leaders in all of the channels or geos, whatever the case may be, really getting buy-in from management before we roll it out to the individuals, so that they can also speak to it with their own staff and their own sales reps. From there, usually I've done a variety of things. Sometimes we're having staff meetings with, like, managers invite us into a staff meeting and talk through it and respond to questions. We've done things where we've done breakouts at, like, a table at the revenue kickoff where they can come and ask questions. We've also done things like Zoom or Slack meetings where people could voluntarily join. That doesn't work quite as well. I really like if you have questions, we've rolled it out. And then if you have specific things, we've done things like hours. Like, we have hours where you can call in and set up one-on-one time, because obviously people want to be specific about their own territory, their own region, their own pay, and you can't do that in a group setting. So we've done all of those things as part of rolling it out at different places that I've been. I personally think that we also make tools available on the web, and people can go in and read through it and ask questions. We have ticketing that they can bring in questions. I've also, another company had my analysts, when new people start, go through after they've been there for a couple of weeks, go through and have a one-on-one and explain the plan, because a lot of times people are reading it, but particularly for new people, they just don't really follow all the nuances. And I don't know about you guys, but we've had things where we've rolled out a plan, we thought we communicated well, and then a month in, the like manager of a group or sales leader will come in and go, what is this that we didn't know that was happening? That's not right. Like a penalty or something that was hidden and didn't get expressly communicated. So that's a bad sign, because then you're unraveling something you already rolled out. So that's why I kind of like, obviously, if you have 18,000 people, you can't have one-on-one conversations, but I think personal outreach as much as possible is really helpful. So.
No, it makes sense. I mean, the outreach, of course, goes a long way. You can really get ahead of some of the questions. But yeah, at scale, 18,000, that's no simple task. And I think it's fair to like try not to take it personally when there's the questions that come up, right? But it is a signal, and that's one of the ones that I actually try to advocate for with my clients, is like capture that. Like, how many of those signals did we get, right? Was it just emails, disputes? If you have the workflow, even better, right? You can capture all of it and have the data to show when it went well, when it didn't. But I think that's a very real indicator of how successful you were in rolling out the plan. One of the most important, right? Because we'll validate ourselves maybe with rosy glasses, so it's important to be careful there. Kyle, would love to hear your take on kind of the rollout philosophy and kind of the cascade of everything.
Yeah, I mean, just so one thing to add on to what Becky said, right? I think everyone would agree that you need to get the managers, directors, right? I don't know how big your organization is, but you need leadership's eyes on it first for two reasons. One, right, you do want to give them a chance to actually provide feedback. I've seen this in the past, with at least when I've changed comp plans, where they'll bring up a question or a concern that we as a broader steering committee hadn't thought of. And it's like, wow, thank goodness you brought this up. We're going to make a quick adjustment, right? So you want to have that meeting. But the other reason, as Becky alluded to, is you need to make sure that they can then answer the questions of their teams. Like, they have to be enabled enough to where they feel confident that if an AE comes to them with questions or frustrations, that they can answer it. You don't ever want your leaders feeling like they're just kind of this middle person and helpless. The biggest lesson I learned, though, and what I would encourage everyone to do, and maybe this seems obvious, but I overlooked it, which is I just assumed when I would roll out a plan to my leadership team that they would go to their teams with that same level of conviction and roll it out to their individuals. And the reality is, like, some leaders do that, but you are going to have leaders who are brand new leaders, and they've never dealt with conflict, and they've never had to communicate change or manage through it effectively. And it's really critical for your senior leaders to have a very direct conversation with that leadership team and say, listen, we've had our chance to evaluate what's going on. The decision has been made. And now I need you and I to go out as a unified front. What can't happen is you go to your team and say, hey guys, I know this sucks, but like, I had nothing to do with it. It just is what it is. And it becomes this like victim mentality. It needs to be very clear to your leaders that their job is to be a unified front. We are making this decision. We are changing these behaviors specifically, and here's why. And I need you to own that. So that's one thing I didn't do the very first time, and it bit me. And ever since then, I have had that conversation. If I could add maybe one more thing that I think is really critical when rolling this out, going back to what I said at the beginning, right? Sales reps are going to be skeptical. It doesn't matter what you do. They are going to be skeptical. No one's going to be like, hey, I know the founders, the board, the shareholders, they have zero interest in making less money, right? Finance has zero interest in like becoming less profitable. So like, obviously you're doing this to try and improve some of these metrics. So how is this going to negatively impact me? Is at least the mindset they're all going to have going into it. And that's not illogical, but what you can do to help, calm the nerves is show them, right, what the new comp plan is, walk through the mechanics, and then say, we went back and we applied this plan retroactively to the previous 6 months. And when we did that, here's what you made today, or here's what our average rep made today. Here's what the average rep would have made, right? And sometimes they make more. And if they make less, right, then you point to like, hey, the reps who were making more in 2023, but will make less in 2024. Well, it's because these AEs, right, they'll sell a bunch of new logos, but those new logos churn after 3 months. That's what we're trying to change. So for, hey, you reps who are actually doing the right behavior, you may sell less logos, but they stick around for 5 years. You only made whatever 80K last year. You're going to make 110K doing the exact same thing this next year. And when you can juxtapose those two things, it really helps connect the dots. So that would be the other thing I would add.
No, I love that. I think making it real with examples like that, like archetypes, if you will, right, of different types of performers, and like not even low performers, just different types of performance, right? You got a lot of logos that were this type, and you got a lot of logos. I mean, yours was more obvious, which is the better choice, but still, it may be a little more abstract. I think goes a long way. And I also think, you know, I had one client where we literally we changed the payout curve, and it was almost entirely a net positive across the curve. But even still, there was skepticism of like, what are you doing to my plan? You're taking my money, aren't you? Like, no, like everyone is actually getting paid more because comparatively to your like all your competitors have basically the same curve or something even better, right? So we're trying to just get back to competitive pay levels because there was attrition and all this stuff that we were trying to correct for. And so even still, with all of the good things in the plan, there was healthy skepticism. So yeah, the communication is so important to be very clear on the key messages, or else it might get interpreted the wrong way. Chris, I want to hear your take.
Well, it's actually pretty similar to what both Kyle and Becky shared, right? I think there's the multiple mediums of the way in which messages need to be delivered. We definitely have to focus on accessibility and understanding, and it's not going to be the legalese in the plan. It's going to have to be the, what do I actually need to know and how do I work my plan? As Kyle said, I mean, certainly my experience has been how is the company trying to screw me out of money this year has definitely been the sentiment that I've experienced in my years, right? And it's definitely countered with calculators and examples, putting it in their point of view specifically to kind of help work through okay, so I have to change what I'm doing, right? Or do more of the good things that I'm doing in order to navigate that path, right? Because it is usually a sentiment of, as Kyle shared, improved profit, better margins, better financial outcomes of some kind, right? We're always striving for that, and it is hopefully an expectation of most salespeople that they would expect their quota to go up, right, year over year. And so, what are we going to do to help offset that in some capacity, right? Making that a real feeling that they can sort of figure it out, right? Because we want people to know how to work their plan in order to make lots of money, right? We're looking for mutually beneficial, optimal outcomes. The company does better, the individual does better, because we need the individual to do better in order for the company to do better, right? That's why sales comp can work on both fronts. And I think the only other thing that I was going to mention was kind of what Kyle also hit on as well, is we have to empower the leaders to deliver the message and stand by it. And that's a big part of it. It's not just the message for the individual contributors, but it's also how best can we put those leaders in a way, like help them, empower them to be able to actually execute that way that Kyle called out. So those are the big points.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a few related questions on this too, because there's also, like, I think there's the cascade I mentioned a couple times of communication, where there's like the overall message, something is changing, here's kind of the key tenets of the plan, and then sales manager gets involved and has their team meetings, and if everything Kyle and you and Becky said went right, the sales manager is like gung-ho and explaining how the plan works, and backs it up, right, instead of using it as an excuse with their team to build credibility. But I saw a question from Meredith on the chat here that I think would be an interesting one on this kind of cascade point. Like, do you do a second rollout of the communication of the plan in the year? So let's say you launch it in January, and I'm just going to make up an example. Let's say it's Q2, Q3. You roll it out again, right? Like, here's what you missed maybe in the first launch. Is that a practice you employ, or and maybe I'll start with Kyle, and others jump in if you feel if you have input on this one.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it as like a second rollout. I like that. What I absolutely do is after the first quarter, most of the organizations I've led are on monthly quotas.
Yeah.
A little bit higher velocity sales motion. And so after a quarter, you get a chance to like, really start to see what's materializing and did you impact those behaviors we've been talking about. And I have absolutely circled back at an all hands and been like, hey, as a reminder, right, these were the behaviors we set out to change. Here's exactly where we're at on those metrics. And it's really it's a win-win, right? Because if the metrics haven't changed, it may not necessarily mean that the comp plan's broken, but it definitely is a flag for the sales leadership team, RevOps, finance, HR to get back in the room and be like, what's actually happening? Is there another lever we need to pull? Or is it just, working the ball through the Python, so to speak? So if it is changing those behaviors, right, then absolutely, that's a positive sign. You start to build trust and credibility with the team. And then typically when I'm doing that quarterly, call it all hands, I want to highlight the 2 or 3 AEs in this situation who are like really exhibiting the right behaviors and are crushing their compensation accordingly, right? You want to prop up what good looks like, and you want to make it very obvious to the rest of the sales organization that like people are succeeding on this plan. So if you're someone who's still kind of waffling, it's like you've got 2 choices, right? You can either double down and like get with the program because other people are and they're succeeding, or you can complain your way out of the role. But like this is working and it's doing what we need it to. And some people have got on board with it. So you need to make that choice.
Becky, anything to add to that?
Not really. I've never done a second rollout. As I said, we've oftentimes taken advantage of new hires and doing a rollout with them. At one point, we even were on the new hire like schedule. So at anytime there was a new hire class, one of them was compensation. So in that way, I guess you could say we'd roll it out. But to go to the existing audience that was there originally, what we've done is very much what Kyle was talking about, which is we do quarterly metrics. We share that with the sales leaders, sales management, finance leaders, and oftentimes when I was at a bigger company where we had regional, we would have a meeting with each of the regional offices, which comprised of sales ops, finance, and their sales leader, and went through the metrics and talked about what was happening, what's good, what's not good. Do we need to address something, much as what Kyle said. So those are the activities that we do after we roll it out.
Yeah, got it. And maybe Chris, if you have anything to build on that, go for it. I have another question that I'm curious on your thoughts on in the chat here. It's about just like involving sales in the process, like actually in the process, as opposed to capture feedback on the current plan and we take that feedback and build the new plan. No, we're building the plan and sales is at the table. Like what are some best practices for how you do that? As I have a few examples, like with really confidential change, we were actually like afraid of sales finding out beforehand. So anything you want to share on how you do that or how you've done it?
Yeah, and probably just add a little bit to the prior.
Go for it.
I've done a couple road shows, as it were, specifically putting myself out in there in the quarterly business review site meetings for each of the regions to go over change. So I've seen it where there's more to be done when it's significant change, right? Where it needs to be reiterated. I think you can't over communicate, and really the multiple ways in which you can do that is the more the better. In this case, I've definitely done recorded sessions as well, which is, here's how to work your plan, right? And so it's on demand. Go and watch it. If you don't know, you need to go and spend that time to do it. So I think it's creative to do the various ways that you believe people can consume information, right? And how they can best absorb it in order to implement it. So I'd probably just say that. And then the involving sales in the process. I have definitely done ones where sales really wasn't in the room at all. And I've definitely done ones where sales is at the table. In fact, we have a couple of different sales people and leaders so involved. And I loved an earlier comment about the noise, because to a certain extent, we involved some of the most vocal of the group, because we knew that if we could at least get them won over, that they'd be more than happy to share with everyone else who believed that the skepticism would be make it a lot easier for us to at least have a champion, in the different, future sessions, and everyone would look to that person to be like, okay, so what's the story, right? So I've had these very formalized, essentially, like, we have a charter, and folks sort of kind of come in and out, and more informal over the years. And in the past, I tend to like to at least have a couple of frontline sales leaders in the room wherever possible. But I'll be honest, it's a bit of a function of maturity, right? When we actually talk about comp data and individual people's pay, not everyone really can handle that sort of level of information as it relates to either peers or extended groups or the population in general. And that is one of those gauges, right, that we have to make sure that the people that are participating can handle that and manage that sort of level of sensitive data.
Yeah, if I could just add to that one. So for me, involving sales in the build out, like there's a specific type of person I want to involve, and there's a specific way I want to involve them. So the type of person I want to involve is our highest performing AE or frontline manager, right? The person who's like really crushing it. Because when I change a comp plan, what I want to avoid is really, upsetting the apple cart. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but I think you know what I mean, right? Like I don't want to do that for the reps who are doing a vast majority of the sales. A lot of organizations have this Pareto principle where it's like 40% of your reps are doing 60% of the revenue, or even more extreme. So I want to go find my top couple of managers or AEs. That's who I'm looking for persona wise, assuming, to Christopher's point, they're like professionally and emotionally mature enough to like have the conversation, right? I would hope that's the case, but I've also seen where maybe that is not always true. But what I want to do is, I'm not coming to them and saying, hey, we're building a comp plan. Here's what we're trying to do. What do you think? It's give them something specific to react to. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here are the two options we're actually evaluating. Which one resonates most with you and why? Give them something to react to, and that will make for a much more fruitful conversation, in my experience.
And Kyle, that reminds me of a specific interaction I remember with one of my sales leaders, where we were at a session, right? And he was like, okay, let me just literally pick up the phone, call one of my guys right now and say, okay, here's what we're looking at. And I intimately recall that, because he did exactly what you said, where it's like, okay, this is it. This is it. What do you think? Like, how do you think people are going to respond? And it's like, okay, good, and it is a real clear litmus test of who that maybe in this case sales leaders or the sales population, whatever it is that is the variety of gauges of efficacy that we want to use in this case. I loved how you said that, because it kind of reminded me of sitting at the table and having that exact thing happen.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's really a good idea, because if you sit 5 people on the table, you'll get 5 ideas and you'll never get quorum. So it's best to just say, these are the 2 things we're thinking. What do you guys think about this? I think that's a really good way to. Yeah. I don't have an example of doing it the other way like Christopher did, but it resonated with me, because even in steering committees, when you start the year, there's 20 ideas and you're like, whoa, we can't do it all. So
we didn't come to the SteerCo for ideas. We came for decisions, please. please. But yeah, the only other thing I'll add to that one is, I think when I read that question, the only other framing I had on it is like, what if the comp design changes are driven by something else, like a transformation? Like I've been a part of a few transformations where like the whole sales force is changing from top to bottom, and that cannot yet be announced. But we need to get moving on the comp design. And so I've seen a few like just. A lot of the practices mentioned here still work, but the one thing I would just add on that is the trust factor has to be to the maximum for the people that you're pulling in when you're getting feedback. Like, hey, here's what's changing. Here's why we need your feedback. and however you can guard and cut off some of the data, like only share what is absolutely necessary is one of those practices I'd recommend. And the second is like you may just need to NDA up, and just like it's in some ways, like Kyle, your point about bringing the best performers and things like that, you would still do that, and if, in some ways it's almost like it's like a reward, like you're being brought into the circle, right? And we have to NDA you, but look at all the things we're now sharing with you because of that trust, despite the NDA, which kind of implies otherwise, but still we're only doing that because we actually value your opinion, want to bring you in. So just a few things. Sometimes when I read that question, I hear it from that context, like we just can't literally share it until it's time to launch it. So just wanted to share that. So I know there's a few other questions. I'm just going to move us on to one other topic, and then with whatever time left, we can get through a few other questions. So successful plan rollout, or plan has been rolled out, and by all metrics internally, we feel pretty good about our process to roll it out. But I'd love to hear this group's feedback on how do you determine if the plan we rolled out was done well? Like how effective are the changes that we made to the comp plan in terms of driving the behaviors we intended or the outcomes that we wanted? How healthy is the plan? Do you do health checks? Anything like that, I think would be very interesting to hear this group's feedback on. And so, Kyle, would love to hear your feedback on kind of doing the postmortem on the comp plan rollout.
Yeah, I mean, it's about a quarter after, and again, I know it's going to vary by organization size and sales motion, but we're looking at those behaviors we wanted to change. I'm looking at, a lot of times when you change comp plan, at least in my experience, things like quota are also being adjusted. So I'm looking at things like what's the participation rate, right? If all of a sudden my entire sales team is not hitting quota, like that's a bit of a problem if there wasn't a fundamental change in what's going on with the product or the buyer or the economy. And I'm looking at, again, my highest performers. What happened to them? I use that as a barometer all the time. Like, of course, I care about the broader participation. I want to make sure we don't have OTE on our job descriptions of X and everyone's making half of that. That's not the brand you want as a company. That'll get out into the market. But I also need to make sure that like the reps who are really outperforming their peers, I want them to make exponentially more money. There should be an incentive to go above and beyond. Like that is a very unique thing about sales, and one that may rub people the wrong way, but I genuinely want to see my top performers making fantastic money. And if that's no longer the case because accelerators were taken away or whatever it is, like that can start to impact morale. So it's just a look back on some of those things that I certainly do.
Chris?
Yeah, I think this is a probably no one size fits all sort of thing, because I do believe that it's going to be a little different organization by organization. So Kyle shared like quarterly, right? So if the sales cycle length is something where we've been able to experience a period of behavioral change, right? We can identify that there was some reaction associated with the incentive to then trigger a byproduct or an outcome, right? So enough time has to pass given the type of role, right? I think that's kind of a something that we have to be patient sometimes, right? None of us like that because we probably have a budget that immediately goes up, spikes, right? Day one, as if we're going to immediately sell more, right? Feeling for the sales folks, right? On that regard. But I think it's a category or a couple different categories of things. I mean, I think we're talking about performance, where we've been able to see it or identify it, better outcomes. Technology in terms of like, was the forecast change? Is the pipeline progression moved? Have we been able to flag things in our CRM, right, where we can see that things happened, right? Evidence of some kind, right? I think process, behavioral shifts, and then budget and outcomes, right? Are we selling more of what we asked for more to be sold of, right? Or at least are we making some incremental progression or movement upon it? I think it's an important thing for the group, that chartered group, that steering committee, that whatever it is that you have, call out some of the things where ideally this is what success looks like and this is how we can measure it in order to know and define that we're in fact hitting what we desired to hit. And it's got to go beyond simply we hit budget.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, finance might be fine with that, but like more broadly, right? I think it's important that we have other goals. And I like your point about defining it right earlier on, before the plan is even launched or live. I mean, here are the things we're going to look at as the plan is launched, as it goes live. Like if it's an activity shift, you may be able to measure the activity. The outcome may come later, but is it a specific activity? Like Kyle already gave a bunch of examples of different activities the plan could incent. You could look at that, right? Is the quality of customer, and you have to define quality, but the ones that we're talking to now, is that changed versus before? And I realize not all this data is available, but to the extent that you can, it does give more what's word for live data, live feedback that you can share with the broader cross-functional team, because the outcome comes much later and is also as correlated with a lot of other things that we can't just attribute to the comp plan.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 fails. So we had 2 different situations where we were measuring things quarterly, and one of the things that we had entertained at one point was in this particular role, we wanted it was like a tele type role, outbound, and we thought we'd have a great idea of tying them to revenue, and so we brought that into the plan. And what was happening was, while they were tied to revenue and the reps did well, what we were finding was our customer sat scores were going down because people were not paying attention to every customer that called in. So in that particular role, it was like, we probably shouldn't have done that. The other one that was harder for us to measure was we had an MBO component, so a managed by objective, which is inherently a terrible thing to put in your comp plan, in my opinion. But what was difficult was, you would, at the end of every quarter, you would see this, like, everybody's around 100%, but you had to actually go back to the objectives to see if they were meeting the objectives. And it wasn't just everybody's getting paid, because just inherently it was measured by management. So it was very, very difficult to actually prove that they were working. So that was something we had to deep dive on. And we were spending a lot of time with managers and executives going through the numbers and saying, we're getting paid 100%. Are we actually achieving what we wanted to do with these MBOs? So that one was really tough. And I'd say in both cases, they were fails, but don't have a great answer for those, but they were examples of how you have to get on it right away and have conversations and start measuring what you were trying to achieve by entering this into the comp plan.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I won't open the Pandora's box of MBOs. That's I think it's a whole other separate day of discussion, right? But I think, having clear criteria on what success looks like for that MBO, right? I mean, sure, we'll see 100% for almost everyone all the time on MBOs, but like, did you have clear criteria, at least, like things that we could say, if you actually achieved that performance, would lead to a good outcome? All that kind of stuff, I think, goes a really long way in making sure you rolled out an effective metric that actually drove a behavior. So we have a few minutes left. I mean, since you ended on some fails, Becky, I'm able to end on a fun one, just to add some energy before we wrap up. So this is I already kind of, for the group here, I'm not putting them on the spot, but I want to hear, you can choose one superpower that helps you improve your ability to roll out, launch, do whatever you want with sales compensation. You can choose one. What would it be? Chris, I want to hear your superpower.
I was going to say, I was like, what would it be at anything other than fortune telling?
Yeah.
That was the one that immediately came to mind for me.
Are you responsible for setting targets?
Yeah, well, it would be for everything, right? I mean, if I can do that, then it would seem like I probably have a pretty good handle on setting the whole plan and targets and budget and all that sort of good stuff, right?
All right, fortune telling, Becky.
Yeah, I actually had written that down, was like seeing into the future, same thing. The other thing, I guess, that I wish I was able to do was my superpower would be negotiation, communication. Like, when we come up with a really bad idea, how do I get people to believe me that that's a really bad idea? That I would love to be able to negotiate better than most people.
So a little bit of Jedi on there.
Exactly.
Love it. How about you, Kyle?
I'm in sales, man. So my superpower would be printing money. I would want more money. If I could double the budget for the comp plan, that would be fantastic.
The outcome is important and probably the most important. So I love that. And I take the consultant side of things, right? So I'll just say somehow if I could just blast through all of your calendars and get that meeting booked, because we all know all the different stakeholders that have to be in the meeting, would certainly be the superpower I would take. But on that note, I think we'll leave it there. I know there's a bunch of other questions. My commitment to the group, because we haven't gone through them all, I'll at least try to reach out to you and give my take. And for everyone else on the panel and even in this community, please look at the questions and share your thoughts. I think that'd be a great outcome from this discussion. I just want to do a few thank yous before we wrap up. So, of course, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Kyle, Chris, Becky. This was a fun conversation. A shared experience too. So, I hope we'll stay in touch, and you can obviously count me in your network whenever you need to reach out. Thank you to the Forma team, Christina, Nabil, Alen, and the rest of the crew behind the scenes that made this, I think, summit very exciting and very fun, and for letting me be a part of it. And then thanks to everyone as well who participated in the chat and the Q&A. And then finally, happy Thanksgiving for all the US folks on the line next week. So I think that's all. We'll leave it there, give a few minutes back, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.